This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH. Coming up on this weekend's broadcast, we visit with one of the leaders of a prominent commodity organization. Hello, everyone. Max Armstrong here along with Mr. Mike Pearson. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you as well, Max. A lot happening in agriculture this time of year, as you are no doubt aware. Harvest is getting underway.
Combines are on the move, and a change of leadership at the top of the National Corn Growers Association. We welcome in this weekend the man who's now chairman of the NCGA, Chris Edgington from Iowa. Chris, it's great to have you here after a year when you've served as president of that association that's very active on a number of fronts. How do you feel reflecting back? Any work undone that you were a little disappointed you couldn't accomplish?
You know, there's always work undone, but, you know, this is a game of singles and doubles, and we had some wins. We had some successes. We had some successes on ethanol. We got the emergency E15 this summer. We got 15 billion gallons out of the RVO. We had a little bit of success on fertilizer, at least on the tariff front, on UAN. Obviously, we're still working on phosphate. Thought we would have heard something by now in the courts. But, you know, the challenges will continue. Next year, Tom Haag will take over and continue to work, and he'll get to talk to you guys more often than I do. But, you know, we've got Farm Bill coming up. We still got input costs that are very high for people to worry about. And obviously, we get past the election and into the next year. We're going to need to get the Next Generation Fuels Act reintroduced in both the House and the Senate, like it is currently, as there's time lapses that happen, and I don't understand all of that. All I know is that we continue to move forward and get more people involved as far as the timing of when they get it introduced. But we do have it in both the House and the Senate, and we're going to keep pushing on that.
Things could change to some extent depending on the outcome of the midterm election, but I suppose you prepare to work with folks of both parties all the time. You have to have bipartisan help, don't you?
You know, agriculture is bipartisan. Everybody eats. Everybody needs what we produce, regardless of the political party. And we've done this for years, where we have to work with the Democrats or the Republicans on Farm Bill, on EPA decisions, on other activities around ethanol, trade. So, yeah, we are definitely a bipartisan organization. And honestly, I'm proud to say that we are, because there are some out there that struggle with that a little bit.
Chris, midterm elections are coming up. There's going to be a lot of new faces in Washington, D.C. Do you feel like the national corn growers are ready to educate those folks on what agriculture is here in America?
Well, I sure plan on it. I mean, it's part of what we do. Every 2 years, we seem to educate some more people. And you know, and sometimes it feels a little bit of a challenge, but it's actually been really rewarding as we watch people say, you know, really, I didn't know that. Please give me more information. And it's successful. It works. So our education process is an ongoing event. And you know, agriculture is changing. Technology we use today, we didn't use 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so even to our longtime friends that keep getting reelected, we still have to come in and educate them on some of the new opportunities that we've got in production agriculture.
And Chris, it's interesting, some of the old technology we've used in agriculture can come under fire. I know atrazine, the EPA is taking a close look at it, and there's a comment period open right now. What are they trying to do?
You know, atrazine it's a frustrating topic. It's been around for over 60 years. We've got it in over 60 products that we use in corn, 90 products overall, because it provides a great synergistic effect of some other products. But yep, it's under attack again. And so we have a call to action that will end on October 7th. And every farmer, every non-farmer that is interested in the benefits of atrazine and how it really makes the tools in our toolbox more successful can weigh in on that. And we've done this before. We feel confident that the science is accurate, that we should be at 15 parts per billion measured in water, not 3.4. And we will continue to push that. There is a scientific panel that will go on. They say those take 10, 12 months to do some more reviewing, peer reviewing, and we push for that. And we plan to continue to encourage everybody to be involved, because atrazine is one of the tools that we have that allows us to no-till, allows us to strip-till, allows us to use more cover crops. And so you start taking those away, And what can happen is more tillage.
That's right. Chris Edgington, current chairman of the National Corn Growers, thanks for joining us this week.
My pleasure.
This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer. And it's time to take a look at the markets. Brian Basting, economist at Advanced Trading, joins us this week. And Brian, combines are running across the Corn Belt. What should producers be doing with those bushels if they're not already contracted?
As you sit here and 2022 harvest gets underway, Mike, we really want to focus on getting control of these 2022 bushels. And by that I mean let's get a floor underneath these bushels, because the combination, Mike, of yield and price is a phenomenal gross revenue. I don't want to overgeneralize. It's not for everybody. We realize there are some portion of your viewers who didn't get those high yields, but in general, the combination of high yields and high prices is unprecedented. There's a number of different ways, Mike, that a producer can defend their balance sheet. They can, for example, sell the crop across the scale, purchase a call option, and that'll give us upside flexibility in case something happens with a post-harvest rally, whether that might be linked to South American weather problems, something else. Another thing they can consider, Mike, is putting the crop in storage, but also purchasing a put option, in my opinion, would be an ideal strategy to give yourself a floor, but leave the upside open. So that's point one in terms of what they're thinking about with the 2022 crops. Mike, I'd add it's not too early to think about 2023. Some attractive margins out there.
There really are, Brian. I want to come back to the 2022 crop and getting that marketed. You mentioned options. We see option values tend to go up in a period of volatility, which we certainly are in agriculture. Is options pricing still conducive to using it as a risk management tool for producers?
It's a great question, Mike, because the implied volatility on these options is very high right now, so they are more expensive. I would maybe put it in the context to your viewers of you're also looking at a more expensive product to protect, and that is your gross revenue. Again, as I come back to that, yield times price, so you are going to pay a little bit more for a premium, an example for a call option. But keep in mind what your gross revenue is, and it would be like insuring a Cadillac versus insuring a very cheap car, if you will. You're going to pay more, but the gross revenue you're protecting is higher. So the answer to your question is yes, they're more expensive than usual. Implied volatilities are up, but you're also protecting a much more valuable commodity in 2022.
That's a good point. Take a step back, perhaps, from the sticker shock of the option value and look at what you're covering. You mentioned looking ahead to 2023. Lots of growers are already securing those high-priced inputs for next year. How do you manage that risk, Brian?
It's an important point, Mike, because as you said, a lot of producers have already made a commitment to plant either corn or beans, for example, in 2023. They've put that leg down, purchasing fertilizer, nitrogen, seed, whatever the case may be. What I'd encourage your viewers to think about is margin, and that is locking down both legs, locking down the input costs, seed costs, cash rent, whatever the case may be, but simultaneously looking out there and locking down the price to effectively lock down a margin. A number of different ways you can do that, but if you're only putting that one leg down, if you will, with inputs, you're leaving the price open to some vulnerability to the downside.
Indeed. Brian, before we go here for a break, input prices, do you anticipate those accelerating here through 2022 and 23?
It's a great question, Mike. I'd say volatility is going to remain very, very high on input prices.
All right. We will be watching for that going forward. Brian, we're going to come back. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the soybean market and what you think happening there when we return talking markets here on This Week in Agribusiness with Brian Basting of Advanced Trading. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. We're back talking markets with Brian Basting, economist at ATI. Brian, we have seen the wheat market experience incredible volatility here over the past couple of weeks. Winter wheat is going in the ground. What are you hearing across the country here in the U.S.?
As we speak, Mike, acreage is increasing here in 2022 compared to a year ago. The driving force for that, or a driving force, is a 10-year high in the crop insurance price that was established for winter wheat here earlier here in September. So producers are motivated. A year ago, there were some challenges, Mike, with a late soybean harvest, for example, in the eastern Corn Belt, parts of Michigan, Ohio, even Ontario, Canada had lower than expected winter wheat because it was a late soybean harvest. This year, if that soybean crop comes off timely, we're looking for an increase in soft red winter acreage substantially perhaps. So in a nutshell, for producers, I would say look at getting some protection in place for 2023 wheat because I think right now we're seeing a little bit of a rebound in the market.
Would you look out just in 2023 for wheat growers, or is it worth looking again to 2024 or beyond?
It's something to look at, that beyond, because those deferred contracts do have some premium built in, Mike, with the uncertainty, of course, about the Black Sea situation with Ukraine and Russia. Flexibility would be the key word I would emphasize if you're going out that far. Even for 2023, flexibility is still very important in terms of giving yourself a floor, but leaving the upside open.
Well, Brian, as we think about leaving the upside open, the soybean market has been on fire. We've seen demand growing from renewable biodiesel and veg oils. Where do you see soybeans headed here as we get through harvest, and how should growers manage that risk?
A number of moving pieces in the soybean market, Mike. The gross revenue is very attractive for soybeans right now, looking at maybe approaching $900 an acre gross revenue. Gross revenue off the combine is unprecedented at that level. Getting a floor underneath that market, leaving some upside there because we're just planting that crop in South America. Factors we're monitoring, Mike, would be obviously South American weather. Also, Argentina had their soy dollar program here during the month of September. They're going to take a share of that export market away from the U.S. as we move into the September, October, November time period. Another factor to watch, Mike, is China. China, there's some indications maybe the soybean meal demand in China is weakening or not as strong perhaps as USDA is projecting. So a lot of moving pieces there.
There certainly are. With the Argentinian issue, that soy export dollar program they put in place, that ends in October 1st, doesn't it?
It's supposed to end here at October 1st. We'll wait and see, but as such, the damage is done from the standpoint of the U.S. export program, short term anyway.
Looking at our meal and oil products on the soy complex, if Argentina sold all their whole beans, can we pick up some more export demand in our products?
It does look like as we start the new crop year for soybean meal, for example, Mike, that'll be a true test because of as you said, lower than expected availability from the largest soybean meal exporter in the world is Argentina. So we'll see what those sales are. Sales in this latest week were just okay for meal. We'll see how that shakes out moving forward. Oil is a little bit more inelastic, but I think meal is the one we'll keep a real close eye on.
Brian, we've been talking a lot about the future this week. Soybeans 2023 November. Do you want to be unloading some of that risk?
It certainly is something worth looking at, Mike. Again, flexibility is the key word I would use in looking that far out. It's nothing wrong with putting some type of floor in there, but there are different marketing tools available where you can utilize a floor in conjunction with a strategy that gives you upside opportunity.
All right, lots to watch for in these volatile markets. Brian Basting, economist at Advanced Trading, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability. Every year, technology companies take their products that are favorites and they make them a little bit better. Apple is doing such a thing with their iPhone. Max, do you have a new one quite yet?
I guess it's on the way, thanks to Mr. Colby shoving me that direction. Let's see what he sees in those new products from Apple.
Are you in the market for a new iPhone? If so, this is the tech segment for you. Our annual review of the next generation of iPhone, the iPhone 14. It comes in 4 models, and I know it can be a little bit confusing, but there's a big jump between the 14 and the 14 Plus to the Pro models. And I want to make that a little bit easier for you today to understand. They look the same, but as you can tell, there's some subtle differences. You can see the 2 models on the left, they've only got 2 cameras, not 3. They also have some internal differences that we'll talk about here in the second. On the right side, of course, you've got the Pro models with the 3 cameras. When you dive into the internals, all the phones get some great new camera technology, including much better in low light. They also have 2 major new features that have never been on an iPhone. That's crash detection and emergency SOS via satellite. They also get improved battery, ceramic shield, and they're water resistant. When you move to those Pro models, you get all the standard features, plus you get dynamic island, always on display, and again, another leap in camera technology. Get this, The main camera has a 48 megapixel lens. You also get that A16 Bionic chip. And my favorite feature, I think, is check out how bright the new display is. It's nearly twice as bright as any model before this, which is a big deal if you're using an iPhone on a farm or ranch. Now, one thing I want to add, do your homework on these phones. You can go out, there's a comparison tool with Apple, and compare your iPhone 8 or your 10 with the new one. The biggest difference, though, you're going to learn is the power of this phone physically. Obviously, a lot of us use these for cameras, and they've upgraded these in great ways this year. The selfie camera now has been improved. It also has autofocus. All the phones also have a new action mode, which basically takes the stability out. And when you get to the Pro models, well, you get some Pro features. Look at that. You essentially have 4 different lenses in your phone. And they've got this new dynamic island, which is kind of cool. Essentially, they use that area where your selfie cam is to dock some features. It's kind of neat. But the two big things, and we talked about them briefly, one of them is crash detection. And essentially, they've added a bunch of sensors to this phone. It can actually record up to 256 Gs. And if you become incapacitated in any way, it's going to call authorities for you, which is a great feature on a smartphone. They've also added a completely new feature as well, and that is satellite connectivity. If you're out in an area and you need help or you want to send a message, you can do that. Now, Apple has said it's free for the first 2 years, and they haven't announced what that cost will be in the future. But again, a great new tool added to our iPhones. Now, one more thing I'm quickly going to add in here. Sorry about it, Max. You might have to buy these. This is the new AirPod Pros. And the reason why is I've never been a big fan of them. I've always used the AirPod Maxes when I'm outside or if I'm on a mower. Obviously, that's kind of a loud job. But let me tell you, I threw these things in and they worked flawlessly. I sure appreciate it when manufacturers like Apple make huge improvements to technology that we use every day.
Well, clearly there's some things I hadn't thought about in those new products from Apple.
Yeah, there's a lot of new technology coming there.
I hope my daughters or granddaughters weren't watching it. I don't think they've ever been on this show like Chad's
That's true.
kids just were. He made sure he got them in. It's the promise of biodiesel we want to talk about next here on This Week in Agribusiness and how it might change the agriculture landscape. There was an intriguing report released just the other day by CoBank, the Knowledge Exchange. And Ken Zuckerberg is with the Knowledge Exchange at CoBank and shares a few comments with us this weekend. Ken, it's great to have you here to sort through this a little bit. The promise of biodiesel is huge, it appears, right now.
That's correct, Max, and wonderful to be with you and the audience.
From the standpoint of government direction here, this is a big part of it, is it not? That recent IRA that was passed in Washington is going to help provide some impetus.
Max, certainly the IRA is a catalyst for the growth in biofuels, but I think a few items and events that predated the passage of that legislation were critical. If you don't mind, I'll list them and we can dive into any ones that are of particular interest to you. So first, you've had a terrific shift by the energy industry towards embracing the ideas of sustainability and being more climate smart. For many years, big oil wanted nothing to do with corn, and then an interesting, innovative set of technologies involving soybeans came about, and thus renewable diesel became a mainstream way for the oil majors and refineries to get involved in this sector. Next, you had some attractive financing and regulatory dynamics across key parts of the country, California and parts of the West Coast. And what we saw in the 2 years prior to this IRA bill and now legislation was projects and capital moving in to take advantage of the renewable diesel production opportunity.
So what will that mean in terms of the production of crops? Ethanol's role is going to diminish, is it not?
So if we separate those two, and if I could, Max, I'll just take a minute on ethanol. So ethanol is corn-based, and renewable diesel consumes soybeans. On the ethanol side, ethanol is a very useful, terrific fuel for motor vehicles, cars. And the interesting dynamic there is that a lot of folks have thought ethanol was candidly on its last legs because of electrification. So first, that's not the case. Electrification will take a little bit longer to come into play versus initial expectations. There are some reasons there I can talk about, but long story short, the expansion of ethanol to a higher blend is positive for that sector, and we continue to believe ethanol is a terrific bridge towards more electrification. Diesel, which powers commercial engines and tractors and trains and lots of different transportation-related engines. Diesel is a 44 billion gallon market, and the renewable diesel opportunity is such where we have about a billion in capacity today, growing at 6.5 billion by 2030. So the opportunity here is to help that industry, the commercial transportation and manufacturing and production industries, benefit from a greener renewable fuel, which uses soybean and other oil seeds, as well as tallow as feedstocks.
So we won't see electric engines necessarily coming into that transportation sector you talked about, semi-trucks or I'm thinking also, about all of these other current diesel uses. That's not going to happen. They'll continue to use diesel, but a biodiesel.
Correct, Max. That's how we're looking at it. Not to say electrification will not come to the commercial sector. It actually will. But as we look at, again, that 44 billion opportunity, if not more, when we resume to economic growth, we think there's a balance. First of all, the 6.5 billion gallons is a fraction of that total opportunity. The industry will still and candidly ought to use a variety of fuel sources, fossil fuel and the climate smart renewable diesel and biodiesel we're speaking about.
Finally, in the half minute remaining, this will mean a need for significantly more, not just soybean acres, but also total oilseed acres, correct?
Correct, Max. When we look at it, and again, in our report, we did a theoretical analysis. It's not entirely possible for us to know exactly where all the soybeans or other oil seeds will come from. But long story short, if we look out to 2030 and we stop exporting soybeans and use the domestic beans for domestic crush, there's still about 927 million more soybeans that are needed. So we either have to import those, we have to import other types of oil seeds, we need to grow more canola and sunflower, and expand soybean acres. So these are all dynamics which figure into what we think will be an interesting change in the U.S. crop mix.
Ken, we appreciate it so much. Thanks for visiting with us about that report you folks have put together at CoBank. Nice to have you on the show with us.
Thank you, Max. It's been a pleasure.
Ken Zuckerberg from the Knowledge Exchange at CoBank. By the way, I'm putting a link on my personal Twitter account to that report if you'd like to look at it, at Max Armstrong on Twitter. There's more coming up on This Week in Agribusiness. This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Over the past 18 months, there has been a growing interest in soybean crushing facilities, Max, and those facilities are expanding.
Yeah, the investment is coming along, and that's going to help soybean growers, to be sure. The United Soybean Board has been investing, and they'll continue to do so. We visited about that just a few days ago with one of the representatives of the board.
Well, what's really exciting about it is it means that we're seeing a lot of new investment in crush facilities around the country. Over the next couple years, you look at company announcements, and we're poised to be growing crush by, upwards of 20-25%. So that means a lot more beans getting crushed here domestically. Great for farmer demand, keeping it here in the U.S.
Of course, you have to find a home for all components of the bean. That's important too, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and that's one of the things that's fantastic about the bean is that we have so many diverse applications. It's not just food, it's not just animal feed through soybean meal. It's not just biodiesel and renewable diesel as an emerging fuel source. It's also things like dust suppressants, asphalt and concrete stabilizers, shoes. I'm actually wearing some shoes made by Goodyear that are made with soybean oil. So the miracle bean has so many applications, and I think that's incredibly exciting.
The airline industry moving this into the spotlight. When I saw that United was going to be testing it, I think that was really what got my attention about this potential new market.
Well, you look at the total market size for biomass-based diesel fuels, which are renewable diesel, traditional biodiesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. Right now, it's over a 3 billion gallon market. Sustainable aviation fuel only comprises about 10 million gallons of that right now. But you look at the commitments made by a number of airlines and commitment to decarbonization. Certainly seeing the opportunities for soybean oil and other bio-based feedstocks is incredibly exciting because this is an avenue that is likely going to grow significantly in the years to come.
I guess that underscores the need for more crush capacity by all means. Somebody might ask, Mac, are we up to the challenge?
Well, if we means America's farmers, then I say absolutely yes. Because our farmers grow efficiently. They grow to produce, to support burgeoning demand across the country, across the globe, across diversified demand spaces. Again, food, feed, fiber, fuel, we've got it all covered.
The checkoff plays an important role in bringing these new uses along, does it not? I mean, we've seen, as you mentioned, all of the various uses. It continues to be an important driver.
Absolutely. The role of the checkoff is a research and promotion organization, and through working with partners and subcontractors around the country, we're able to advance opportunities in new uses, like all those that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. If you look back to the 90s, the checkoff was instrumental in even establishing the biodiesel industry within the United States. And now we're at kind of the next generation, the next turn of the crank there, as we see renewable diesel as a fuel option that can potentially displace petroleum diesel wholesale made from soybeans grown right here in the Midwest.
It underscores the need for the checkoff to have that long-term view. You guys are in it for the long haul, obviously, on behalf of the soybean growers. You have to have that view on down over the horizon, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, our farmers, no farmer farms for one season. You have to think about generations. You have to think about producing for 30, 40 harvests. And the checkoff, we have to look the same way. We can't focus on near-term opportunities. Yes, they're part of the portfolio, but we have to be thinking long-term about what's going to be supporting demand and helping continue opportunities on the supply side through research and development, looking at advanced crop technologies, partnering across a number of organizations to help continuous improvement on farm whilst continuing to grow demand as well. It's a long-term proposition.
Mac Marshall, working with the outstanding growers there who comprise the United Soybean Board as they labor on behalf of the farmers who help pay for that work. Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. Well, I guess we need to know from our agriculture weatherman what the lingering impact will be for the storm and the wide area that has been affected in the eastern United States. How do you see it, sir?
Well, still lollygagging its way, his way. Ian out on the eastern seaboard. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But you know, these weather systems, when the Atlantic Basin or the eastern Gulf get busy and systems ride up that Appalachian Trail or points east, weather comes to a screeching halt across the country. At least it's west to east movement. What you get locked into, you get locked into. And that certainly applies to the Pacific Northwest. We've had some fires in a couple of spots here, Northern California and Oregon, but overall, it's suitable for outdoor work, harvest operations, etc., so forth and so on. We've had a couple of mornings of frost and brief light freeze, as you would expect for the calendar date, across parts of Big Sky and the Dakotas. And there's a weak upper air system here making its way with a couple of spotty rain showers, nothing really to impact outdoor work or harvest operations or dramatically improve the drought situation across the Northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest. There's some late season warmth and heat, yeah, we can still push the 80-degree mark. You might see that up towards the Black Hills and Nebraska Panhandle, but good moisture reduction, dry down values, harvest operations, but again, an absence of any organized moisture expected this week from the Pacific Northwest back into the northern plains, and maybe push on the 90-degree mark down towards Salt Lake City, and some low to mid 90s into the valleys of California. Not unusual for just about early October. Warmth in the desert Southwest. The monsoon season is over with. Nothing cooking in the Pacific Basin, and out across the plains again, a reflection of that system up through the northern Rockies, generating a couple of widely scattered showers and thunderstorms. The drought pattern obviously continuing on central and south end of the winter wheat belt, where rain is needed to get that crop to germinate before we go into hibernation mode. Little change in the overall steering currents and the weather, sensible weather from the valleys of California to the Four Corners and back to the central and southern plains for the middle and late portions of the week.
With the hurricane stacking up the weather systems, it really provided a great window of opportunity, didn't it, for wheat growers to seed their fields,
yep,
and for corn and soybean producers to get in and harvest.
Exactly. Made a little more progress, we think, in some of those western areas for one reason or another, good or bad or ugly, and maturity a little bit behind schedule, maybe 5 to less than 10 percentage points in the eastern belt, but everyone else otherwise and as a whole, good progress here, whether it's at least leaves dropping in the soybean fields and or corn plants that are ready to go. There's been a chill in the air and some frosty mornings, even a frost patch into parts of central Illinois last week. There's another push of some chillier weather north of the border in absence of any widespread moisture. That's pretty much the story here for this week. Late season warmth across the northern and central plains, perhaps into the western corn belt. Before we get another cold front to move on through, a couple of sprinkles of rain, maybe a wet snowflake up towards the Sioux. Anything in the gauge is a quarter inch or less. We really should continue to see some good advance in what should turn out to be probably an early wrap on the harvest season across much of the corn belt. Pretty quiet weather picture over the southern plains in through Texas. The Gulf western area is pretty quiet as well. Cleanup and recovery where the western flank of Ian impacted areas east of the Mississippi Valley into the middle and late portions of the week. Quiet in the desert Southwest. Stray shower of no consequence and through Kansas and Oklahoma. Mild, quiet, dry high pressure for cleanup and recovery over the southeastern states.
Do you see much left over from Ian this week?
Yes, some sense of an identifiable surface low. We plotted it like this here. This is the remnant circulation from that powerhouse 155 to some reports of 171 mile-an-hour wind gust around that Fort Myers area. But at least some tropical showers are still left over here early in the week. High pressure for the northeast and New England. They're cleaning up from Fiona northward into southeastern Canada. Quiet weather picture across much of the Corn Belt. Again, a more or less October feel, but little, if any, organized moisture across the heartland for this week, including the Corn Belt, maybe a snowflake up north towards the Sioux. Cleanup and recovery, whether it's been open bowl cotton, flooding, citrus took a hit as well. So some ongoing stream and river issues here. Here's the last of Ian moving out of the Outer Banks. And I tell you what, they've had a lot of sand go right back in the ocean after a cleanup and recovery effort there early in the summertime season. Ongoing river flooding here in the mid-Atlantic region, but overall the rest of the southeastern states warm, quiet, and dry for cleanup later in the week.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot Bio-Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio-Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. Well, Greg gives us his extended weather forecast now. Indeed, that's after we look at his precipitation map.
Yes.
It looked ugly last week. Show us the new one.
Yeah, I was thought I'd be off by a foot on rain when I threw 20 inches in there over the southeastern states from Ian. We pretty much had it targeted down there over west central Florida, a track across the peninsula, back into Georgia, up across areas east of the Appalachian Trail. And here it is here early to the middle parts of the week. There may be some additional 1 to 3 inch rainfall totals, pushing some of the totals in the eastern mid-Atlantic region, 4, 8, maybe locally 10 inches. Much quieter weather picture rainfall-wise over areas of southeastern Canada. Otherwise, it's there up towards the Sioux, back across maybe areas of North Dakota, Bismarck that might see up to a half an inch, quarter inch or less. Otherwise, much of the country, little to none central and southern plains, spotting the Pacific Northwest. But again, great opportunity for harvest here and cleanup and recovery. And certainly thoughts are with the folks over the southeastern states coming off Ian.
For the week of October 10th, how warm will it be for harvest to continue?
I think by October standards, we'll call it hot. Might even be a heat wave around here. Here is the still dominant hot ridge capable of 80, 85 degree weather. That's near record setting territory for parts of the plains. Again, dry grounds beget a dry, warm weather pattern. Reverse of that, you know that is. And here's still some lingering cloud cover issues and moisture over the eastern parts of the country, keeping temperatures a bit below average. No tropical scene for Texas, but moisture is back into play here. We'll keep an eye on Florida and another approaching system into the northeast of New England. Much of the heartland high and dry, good for some. Others in those drought areas, not so good.
I'm worried about combine fires and that kind of heat, dry conditions. The week of October 17th, how warm?
And on the flip side, moisture reduction, dry down values, and no need to stoke up the furnace or the boiler here as temperatures stay above average over much of the northern and central plains, a little bit below average here. Normal southern plains, a little leftover heat for the valleys of California. And we'll get some moisture going into the Pacific Northwest up through the southwest sections of the Canadian Prairie, parts of the northern Rockies. Tropics, I know it's a late October calendar date, but it's balmy, still bathwater. We'll keep an eye maybe on the development here in the western Gulf and a system coming out of the southwest Atlantic. Any way you want to look at it, above average moisture expected in this part of the country, up and down the eastern seaboard as well.
What's your confidence in this warmth and dry situation for the heart of the country hanging on then?
Very good confidence and what should be an early wrap to the harvest season. Winter, we'll talk about it the weeks to come. Could be a different story, and it will be. Look at the warmth, virtually coast to coast, a little bit below average across the Gulf Coast area. Beginning to see a little influx of some moisture across the high plains areas of the Rockies. Good news there. Big sky country Pacific Northwest. Dry time across the mid-Atlantic region. Still some favorable outdoor work and harvest weather for much of the Corn Belt.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
Many of us recall back in the day growing up on the farm, there might not have been anything on top of the muffler, so we had to improvise. We talk about it in Max's Tractor Shed, brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. Maybe at one of those outdoor farm shows you saw the salesman for Store-Lock standing in the drawer. That's how strong they are. Find out more by going to StoreLock.com. Well, I began the discussion the other day on my Facebook page, Max Armstrong's Tractor Stuff, about what we would have put up on that muffler to cover it. Many of us, when we were growing up, didn't have muffler caps. Dad said we can't afford that, so we'd use a tin can, maybe a pineapple can or a grape juice can, whatever it took to cover up that muffler. We began the discussion there. You can chime in if you care to on Facebook, Max Armstrong's Tractor Stuff. We keep an eye on what's happening at Big Iron Auctions. Here's Mark Stock with a weekly report on what they're selling.
Well, hello, Max. Big Iron will be selling 800 head of 900 weight black and black baldy steers on our October 4th livestock sale. If you're looking for the right kind, folks, coming right off of grass by Burchard, Nebraska, check out these animals selling with no reserve on BigIron.com. Then on October the 5th, Max, Robert McVean is retiring from Johnstown, New York. They've got a New Holland H7550 disc bine, a Case 1840 skid steer, a John Deere 310A loader backhoe, a John Deere 7200 Series 4-row planter, a Case IH 140A mechanical front tractor, and a John Deere 8434 wheel drive. The Randy Leidenberger Estate will sell 18 items in Oakley, Kansas, including a New Holland 9484 4-wheel drive tractor. And Mahindra USA will be selling tractors and three-point equipment out of their California, Pennsylvania, and Texas locations. And Glacial Hills Land Company is retiring from Hiawatha, Kansas with 27 high-quality items. Go to BigIron.com, check out the livestock, land, and machinery selling next week.
Schools are back in session across the country, and FFA members are working on their projects and getting together with their fellow members. And we like to meet the folks who are big wheels over at FFA. Joining us this week is Elijah Brock. He's the past Kentucky State FFA Vice President. Elijah, what was it that prompted you to join FFA in the first place?
Well, back in 2017, I started agriculture classes at my high school in Corbin, and I went over FFA in the history portion of Principles of Agriculture class. And I thought, man, this is something that I really want to get in. And then I found out that you could do contests and meet people, and I just took off from there. I made some of my best friends. I competed in several things at both the regional and state level, and I've traveled all over the state. It's been wonderful.
And what were some of the highlights as your year of service as the vice president, Elijah?
So I got the chance to go to several different parts of Kentucky that I wouldn't have got to otherwise. One notable thing that I remember about my trip I took a trip back to Central Kentucky, and I'd never been to Central Kentucky. I'd never been past Eastern Kentucky for the longest time, and I got to see just how different the flat part of the state was compared to the mountains where I live.
It is incredible. And Elijah, you hope to keep a career in agriculture?
Yes, I am currently at Eastern Kentucky University pursuing a career in agriculture education. I've taken several classes in agriculture so far, and I'm ready to teach it.
That's fantastic, Elijah. We need quality educators out there across rural America. We wish you the best as your education moves forward. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Max, one of the things we've been talking about is the geopolitical uncertainty around the world, and that's continuing now with a Brazilian election this weekend.
Well, how will it affect the producers there? The farmers who compete with us in the United States? Dr. Cesar Cruz joining us here in the studio from Advanced Trading, and you grew up in Brazil, correct?
I'm Brazilian, I speak Portuguese, so I know a little bit about Brazil agriculture.
Well, Dr. Cruz, let's talk about Brazilian farmers. That soybean crop in Brazil is going in the ground right now. What are the authorities expecting for this year's crop?
Well, let's say that CONAB is expecting that Brazilians are going to plant more acres this year. They're expecting that they're going to produce 3.5 more acres in Brazil this year for beans, 2.5% more corn also. They're going to export more corn and beans. For corn especially, they have just started an agreement with China. They haven't exported anything to China yet, but they're going to expecting that something's going to start happening maybe December, early next year in January, but you can expect good crops for both corn and beans.
Well, I'm curious about that corn crop, Cesar. We've got farmers in the U.S. concerned about fertilizer availability for this next growing season. How are they sitting in Brazil? Do they have access to the crop inputs?
Good question. Yes, they do. They bought a lot of fertilizers, especially from Russia. Right after in the beginning of the war, the conflict with Ukraine, the president visited Russia and made sure that they could supply those fertilizers to Brazilians. Prices are not very cheap, but they do have availability of fertilizers in Brazil.
You mentioned China. Has China made fairly significant investments in Brazil?
Investment-wise, they are buying a lot of agricultural products in Brazil. China is an important partner on the soybean side, but they haven't bought much corn from Brazil yet. So this is very hard to predict how much corn they can buy from Brazil next year.
You mentioned corn, and we think about that second crop, that safrinha crop, that hangs in the balance way out there on into next year. I mean, that really isn't in play at the moment, right? There is a first planting of corn right
Exactly,
now.
You're completely right, yeah. So right now, Brazilians are planting their first corn crop. And this first corn crop is actually stays domestic, so we're not expecting to have big exports from that first crop. And we also have La Niña effects that is actually leaving producers both in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay worried about what can happen in Brazil.
La Niña.
La Niña.
The weather impact. This would be what, the third growing season for La Niña?
Exactly, the third growing season, yeah. We still have 60% chance that La Niña can have La Niña effects by December, January.
What does that mean in the southern hemisphere when La Niña is at work there?
We can expect drier than normal weather that can affect beans and corn during their growing season. So if that happens, we have to keep watching what's happening in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. during December to see what can happen with their crop.
Did I read correctly that some Brazilian farmers just recently received rains to enable them to really get started planting now?
You are right, yeah. They just started planting. They are moving at a decent pace now in Brazil. We are going to see what can happen in the coming months. They expect to have good rain in October, some in November. The critical period would be December.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier. Frankly, I struggle with English, so I might have missed something in the translation here. Isn't the Brazilian soybean crop going to be huge next year? And what is that percentage increase that you mentioned?
In acres, 3.5%.
But what about total production?
Production is going to be close to 10% more production.
10%?
Yeah, and 20% more exports. I think that's important.
Oh, 20% more exports.
Yeah.
That's significant, competing with the United States, to be sure.
It certainly is as we look out to next year, absolutely.
Yep.
Well, thank you for coming in to share some insight with us. We know it's close to you, and it's on the minds of a lot of growers here as they get ready to move on through the harvest season. Many of them already thinking about next year, to be sure.
Happy to be back.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Cesar Cruz from Advanced Trading. Thank you all for joining us here this weekend on This Week in Agribusiness. We appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you next weekend. Have a safe harvest, growers. Have a great week. Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.